चाकरी गई तो गई कहाँ.
Welcome to yet another conversation on Entertainment Live, and joining us is the director and executive producer of Dancing on the Grave. When you are preparing for such an important subject, such a story which is already out there in the open, where do you begin with? What is the step zero in the process?
Well, I'm just trying to think back now to when we started out this project. I think that a lot of the starting point came from the research. I remember me and Chandni and Ankit kind of ideating and talking through the story and kind of collating all of these amazing research interviews that these guys had put together. And in fact, I think we came out with an outline of the actual story itself before we actually started interviewing people, as an idea of where we could take the story, just from the research interviews that had already been done and the news reports that already were in India Today's archive and existing stories as well. So it was really just doing as much research as possible, getting an idea of how we could flesh the story out and the way we could construct it into 4 episodes.
So I want to take this question first to Chandni and then to you, Patrick. Chandni, when you first heard about this story, when this incident actually happened, like for real, where were you and what was your first reaction?
So, Badsha, to be honest, I think this is a story from 1991. I was in school that time, so I didn't really hear the story at that time. But I would imagine, I would say that in 2019, when we really started this research, and when I saw the stories that were on Newstrack and, in our print editions, it'd be in the newsroom itself when I saw this, it was horrifying what had gone down, the tragedy that this family had gone through, the motivations of the people in this particular story. It was not a very well-known, crime for people who kind of followed it later, but it was most tragic, horrifying, interesting story that you could look at in this genre. That's what I remember thinking of it about 4 years ago.
And Patrick, when you were presented with this subject, your first reaction to the story?
Well, I remember really viscerally, actually, because I was in England when I was sent the kind of document these guys had put together of the story, which was a very detailed retelling of the story. And I remember just being so gripped, turning the pages, just couldn't put it down. I was just really absorbed. And obviously there's some pretty shocking twists, which I had absolutely no idea were going to happen. And I just remember that feeling of kind of surprise and just realizing that this is a story that I really wanted to try and tell. So yeah, that was the first step for me.
In this 4-part documentary series, we see there are a number of interviews that have been incorporated in the storyline. People who are from the family, people who were investigating the case, and most importantly or pivotal being the one of the perpetrator himself, Mr. Shraddhanand or Mr. Murli Manohar, who is the guilty here. So can you tell me the preparation or how you approached it? And first of all, how did you gain access to that?
So I think what we also do before we go to the directors is, because we, as journalists, that when you start working on a story, you make a wish list of the people who you would like to interview. And we actually don't stop ourselves from thinking of whatever is possible, right? So you would first start with all the primary people that are connected to a case, which would, be family, friends, investigators, judges, perpetrator, all of that. So once we have a wish list, and actually this is the second time we've been successful in doing this, we kind of moved to official permissions to interview, this man who's now been in jail for 32 to 33 years, and we got official permission to shoot with him, and we went in. Our reporters, our bureau chief in Madhya Pradesh was very, very helpful in getting us to do this. And this is one of the advantages of being part of a group like India Today. You have such a strong backing in terms of the people. I mean, we're just fronting this, but we have a huge infrastructure that helps us do all of this. So yeah, that's how we managed to get access to him.
And the preparation? I mean, you were about to interview someone who is guilty and who is already serving a life sentence. So what kind of preparation went into interviewing the man? Did you have nervous
I think,
jitters?
Patrick,
Say again.
Did you have any kind of nervous jitters? Maybe what
I,
was
do you
how
know
to
what?
approach?
I don't. I think that by the time by the time we got to actually into the jail to interview Murli Manohar Mishra, like we'd done a lot of preparation and research. Me and Ankit, who interviewed him, we'd already talked in depth about what we wanted him to talk about, what questions that we were going to ask him, what questions that we needed from him to talk to help build our story. When we actually got to Mishra, we'd already been following the lawyer that defended him for a few days. So it was kind of an incremental build up to that shoot within the jail. So by that time, it just felt like we were smoothly going on as part of the shoot. So I don't feel like that we were necessarily nervous or jittery, but I definitely feel like we were focused and, as prepared as possible. And it was actually 2 days that we spent in Sagar Central Jail speaking to him. So yeah, there was a lot of preparation and organization that went into the actual mechanics of getting crew members into the jail, because we had to have a very, a skeleton crew. We weren't allowed that many people in there, only a certain amount of equipment. So there were certain logistical issues, but I feel like we, the production handled that shoot really well, and it went off pretty smoothly. It was really fascinating being inside that prison, and the warden and the guards were incredibly open and helpful and friendly towards us. So it was a smooth shoot.
I want to ask you, Patrick, first, and then I want to know from Chandni. And that is, in the series, we see there is a beautiful mix of real life footage as well as scenes which have been dramatized, which have been shot later and post-produced. So, for example, I think it's not really a spoiler, but there is a scene where Shakre's family is talking about her marriage with the ambassador, and they are and you have reimagined the scene, how the marriage is happening, or probably the scenes from a household. So how do you pull that off? Because we are talking of a time when there was no social media, there were no mobile phones or mobile cameras. So video footage is very rare to get hold of, or it's something which was not really there. Like today, we have access to video cameras, we document everything, and we put it out there in the social media. So when you are trying to recreate an era or a timepiece, how do you do that? How did you do that?
Well, I mean, it's many different facets go into that. I think one of the things was that we did have some archival footage from India Today's archives of the case itself, quite extensive amounts of footage. So we knew what certain interiors looked like, and we knew from today which houses certain people were living in, and what the interiors of, and the art directors and the production designer did the research to find out what those kind of interiors would look like. And and as far as stuff like the wedding goes, I mean, that's just kind of, we consulted I think it was kind of an Imam Shia wedding expert who kind of explained to us how it would work and what kind of things would be in the ceremony. There were also pictures taken from the wedding itself that we kind of, obviously the costume designer Shruti took as inspiration for her costume. So it was like there was a lot of research that went into it, a lot of kind of brainstorming and ideation, and the team members making it look as authentic as possible.
When you're working on a subject like crime, you're narrating a story. You're telling a story either from a neutral perspective or from the perspective of the victim or the culprit. So, what route did you take here? Are you trying to build a neutral ground here and trying to weigh in arguments and counter arguments, or is this a story being told from the eyes of the victim's family, or are you trying to delve into the reasons as to why Shraddhanan did what he did? Or why did such a gruesome incident or an event or a crime happen?
Well, I think there are kind of many parts to it. I think that the one thing that we always kept coming back to when we were telling the story is wanting to understand Shakira and what motivated her to make these to make these choices, which have often been scrutinized, and maybe certain unfair kind of conclusions have been reached about her. We wanted to know more about her. We wanted to really explore her as a character. Then obviously the series has kind of a shift in perspectives that we wanted to kind of show what his story was. Do you know what I mean? He tells a story, he weaves a story, right? So we have we have kind of two stories, and then at the end we kind of bring it back and kind of we examine how those stories intersect and where the truth lies in it. And I think that makes our show kind of, hopefully quite novel, is that we have this kind of shift in perspectives halfway through, and then bring it back together at the end.
Let me ask this question on a very lighter note. I know it's a very serious and an important docu-series that you guys have come up with, but as a fan of Patrick Graham, I wanted to ask this question to him. We have seen several of your works in the past, be it Betal, Ghoul, and now this 4-part docu-series. Are you more inclined toward blood and gore in general, or does it come naturally to you to tell these twisted tales?
I don't know about that. Like, I think I'm slightly drawn to the macabre just because, I like hearing those. Well, I for some reason, those kind of stories resonate with me. Certainly with the kind of horror stories that I've been working on in the past. But I do think that Dancing on the Grave is a shift in that it doesn't really, I wouldn't kind of draw parallels between the two types of stories, because at the end of the day, Dancing on the Grave is really focusing on exploring the life of this woman and what made her tick, and it's a very different kind of story, although of course it does contain some horrific elements, but yeah.
If given a chance, is there any other genre that you would like to explore in future? Maybe a rom-com.
I'm not sure about a rom. I think probably a rom-com is the one thing that I can't do. But maybe some sci-fi.
Okay.
Sci-fi, maybe some comedy horror, perhaps. Let's see.
We certainly look forward to that. And my final question to both of you is that we have seen a sudden rise in the audience base for crime stories. What do you think is the reason behind that? Are people more drawn towards negative in general?
I think that people have always been voyeuristic in nature. And I think crime gives them an excuse also to say, oh, thank God it didn't happen to me. It's a little bit of both of that, really, in how I see is the fascination with crime stories. I mean, at the end of the day, I know that we're delving into really dark crime stories, but we're trying to do it in a really intelligent way and look at slightly different context. And I think that's how I experiment with the stuff that we are making, the documentary series we are making with our streaming partners. I think that's how it's different. But yes, the what happens actually does stay as the spine of the story and helps us to expand it into a bigger context. Patrick?
Yeah, I do think that human nature is such that we'd like to kind of look into dark and dangerous places, and especially if we can do that from the comfort of our living rooms without actually being affected by it. That's something that human beings are drawn to. We like to be scared. We like to hear about dangerous, horrible things. But I think that's also the reason human beings love hearing stories so much is a way of learning and a way of learning lessons. And I think that a story like this can serve as a warning. It can give you experience and it can give you catharsis without you actually having to go through this terrible experience. And I think that that's part of the appeal of these kind of stories.